Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all the representatives, the distinguished representatives of the states parties. Greetings to you also from the director, Dr. Mechtel Rossler, who is currently traveling to China, as you know. We are very delighted to have with us our Assistant Director General for Culture, Mr. Ernesto Ottone. So what we will do is this budget briefing, after I give a brief introduction, Mr. Ottone will take over from me and will provide the details of the budget. This budget briefing is held to comply with Decision 39-15, Bonn 2015, by which the committee requested the World Heritage Center to hold a budget briefing prior to each session of the committee. This is just an information meeting, and this item will be examined by the World Heritage Committee during its session. Next, please. Yeah. So first of all, let me just recall that there are three sources for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, three funding sources. The first is the World Heritage Fund, the budget for which is decided upon by the World Heritage Committee. It is the core funding. The second is the regular program, the budget for which is decided upon by the General Conference of UNESCO. And the third is extra budgetary funds, the budget for which is decided for each project by the donor concerned. The extra budgetary allotment for 2020 is $5.7 million. This is a rounded figure. The extra budgetary funds fully depend on donors' interest in specific countries, sites, and activities, which limits the availability and impact of this kind of funding and makes them unsuitable for statutory activities, making them an unpredictable source of income and therefore not reliable on the medium to long term. It cannot be a sustainable answer to the financial constraints and challenges of the convention. The regular program for 2021 it's the biennium, is US dollars 11.3 million. So to recall that the regular program, and this is a rounded figure also, it funds the World Heritage Center's staff and statutory meetings and activities by the UNESCO field offices. Since 2006, the World Heritage Center lost 10 posts. So we have now 28 established posts for 2021 against 38 in 2006-2007 biennium. So I'd like to underscore that while the level of staff resources available for the convention is decided by the governing bodies of UNESCO, Executive Board and General Conference, the activities of the Secretariat are decided by the governing bodies of the convention, the Committee and General Assembly. This results in a mismatch between the extent of the activities to be undertaken by the Secretariat, which is constantly increasing, and the available human resources, which are declining. Although thanks to some states parties, we have some support in this field. There is a need to align the Secretariat's workload with financial resources available. The World Heritage Fund for 2020-2021 is $5.6 million as a rounded figure. The income for the World Heritage Fund approved by the committee comes from the contributions that the states parties are bound to pay according to Article 16 of the Convention. The amount represents 1% of the contributions to UNESCO. This income cannot increase in the future, since the Convention is almost universal. There are very few member states which have not yet ratified the 1972 Convention. If we can expect any increase, it may come only from supplementary voluntary contributions, such as the doubling of contributions on a voluntary basis. But there are other options which were recommended by the General Assembly in its resolution 19GA8. The World Heritage Fund has also 5 sub-accounts which are funded via voluntary contributions by states parties or other donors. These sub-accounts are the sub-account for specific activities created in 1995, the sub-account for promotional activities created in 1995, the sub-account for international assistance created in 2013, the sub-account for human capacities created also in 2013, the sub-account for the evaluation and nominations created in 2019. These sub-accounts are subject to 7% support costs. You will find on our webpage dedicated to the fund the link to access the letters for contributions. And you can see the red arrow on the slide. As since 2019, these letters are no longer sent in printed form, but posted online. The latest statements of assessed contributions, see green arrow on the slide, and I will not give you the latest status of contributions, since this is part of the budget document and as such will be presented at a later stage by Mr. Othone. I will give you now some background on the issue of the sustainability of the World Heritage Fund, which may be useful for discussions during the World Heritage Committee at the Budget Working Group. Discussions started in 2008 at the 32nd session of the World Heritage Committee in Quebec, around first on the growing demand under the convention, leading to a number of unfunded activities undertaken by both the Secretariat and the advisory bodies. And on the other hand, the awareness that the level of assessed contributions under the World Heritage Fund will not increase, since it is almost universally ratified. The income of the World Heritage Fund through assessed contributions is almost at its established limit. In order to try solving this mismatch between workload and resources, the committee at its 33rd session in 2009 in Seville requested the World Heritage Center to develop a range of options to mobilize equitable additional voluntary contribution to the fund. Various options for allocating unrestricted supplementary voluntary contributions have been presented to the 34th, 35th, and 36th sessions of the World Heritage Committee in 2010, 2011, and 2012, respectively. In 2012, at the 36th session in St. Petersburg, the necessity to cut the 2012-2013 World Heritage Fund budget by 21%, following the non-payment of contributions by one state party, made the issue of sustainability even more acute. At that time, the advisory bodies reduced their budget by $400,000 by cutting all capacity building activities, whereas the World Heritage Center faced a reduction of $1 million on the activities it managed, mainly capacity building, regional programs following periodic reporting, resource manuals, education, and awareness raising. As can be seen on the screen, after 10 years, the fund has still not recovered from these cuts. In 2013, following the recommendation that the committee made at its 34th session in Phnom Penh, the General Assembly recommended to states parties willing to make unrestricted supplementary voluntary contributions to apply one of the options you see now on the screen and which had been developed in the previous years. I'm not going to read those options as you can see them. Excuse me. In 2015, at the 39th session in Bonn, and again in 2016 at the 40th session in Istanbul, the committee decided that the ad hoc working group, which is an intersessional group established by the committee since 2014 to discuss some critical issues between committee sessions, would examine the issue of the sustainability of the fund, still focusing on the increase of resources or the optimization of their use. It should be noted that decreasing the workload, which is another way to make workload match the resources, has never really been envisaged. This resulted in 2017 in the adoption of a roadmap for the sustainability of the World Heritage Fund by the committee at its 41st session in Krakow. It integrates short, medium, and long-term actions towards achieving sustainability of the fund. Reporting on the outcomes of the short-term measures of the roadmap is available in the budget document. In 2017, the Internal Oversight Service of UNESCO produced a comparative mapping study of forms and models for use of advisory services by international instruments and programs, which the committee had requested in 2016 at its 40th session in Istanbul. On this basis, the ad hoc working group, which met in 2017-18 between the 41st and 42nd session of the committee, reflected on how to increase the resources of the fund and optimize the use of its resources. In parallel, the ad hoc group also reviewed the effectiveness of the global strategy for a balanced and representative World Heritage List. It should be noted that the IOS noted that the current advisory body's practices for assessing nominations to the World Heritage List are heavy and costly, and also recommended that the World Heritage Committee identify the root cause or causes for committee decisions deviating from advisory bodies' advice, procured at a significant cost to the World Heritage Fund, and take action to address them. This work, which went on in the 2018-19 biennium, resulted in the creation of the sub-account on the evaluation of nominations, the reform of the nomination process with 2 phases. These 2 elements are dealt with in the budget document, which will now be presented by Mr. Rotone. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Mr. Rotone, ADG.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you so much. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, nous allons maintenant
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we will now move on to the presentation of the budget document, WHC/21/44.com/14, which was put online on the 24th of June last. This document is made up of 4 parts that follow the title of point 14 of the agenda, presentation of the final accounts of the Heritage Accounts Fund for 2019-2020, and the presentation of the biennium 2021-2021, and a presentation of the biennium for 2022-2023, and follow-up of 43.14 decision. The 3rd point on the budget is extremely important. This is why I will be presenting it last. So the first part of the document is taking stock of the situation on the basis of certified financial statements. In this document, you have the income 2019 2018-2019, that is to say the contributions that are due on the basis of the convention or voluntary, the expansions 18-19, and those that are put on the ordinary funds and the extra budgetary funds. With regards to income, let's look first of all at the contributions that are due according to the convention. Here we have the contributions that have been paid according to Article 16.1, that is to say the 181 states that are concerned. As you can see, payments in green on the graph were well below the expected level, which means that the arrears have increased. However, at the end of the year 2019, which is the basis for the budget 22-23, the total amount of unpaid amounts reached about $491,000. That is to say, a major increase of 54% in comparison to the total unpaid at the end of 2017. You will see now on the screen the contributions received on the basis of Article 16.2, that is to say the 13 states party. As you can see, the regular increase, an encouraging increase since 2014 to 2017, stopped suddenly with a drop of 25% of assessed contributions paid. It is important to remind you of the fact that the 16.2 are the voluntary contributions of 13 states country. Now, with regards to additional voluntary contributions, which are not restricted, their amount in 2018-2019 was 3.5 times higher than that of 2016-2017. This is due to 5 states countries, Australia, Norway, Sweden, Turkey, that are doubling on a regular basis their compulsory contribution. We'll look at received income in the sub-funds. The contributions of the sub-accounts dedicated to specific activities have increased a lot in 2018-2019 in comparison to the previous period. Thanks to a contribution of Norway of $2.9 million, aiming at targeting Africa and the sites in danger of the World Heritage. Without this unique contribution, we see that the level of contribution would have been the same as that of 2016-2017, despite the increase of the amounts paid by the private sector in mauve or pink on the screen. The governments of Bahrain and Azerbaijan have welcomed the 42nd and 43rd sessions of the World Heritage and have made significant contributions under this sub-account for covering the costs linked to the preparation and organization of the 42nd and 43rd committee meetings. Voluntary contributions to support the human capacities have decreased by 18.2% in 2018-2019 in comparison to the previous biennium. We thank the 8 countries that have contributed, that is to say Spain, Kazakhstan, Monaco, Montenegro, Norway, the Republic of Korea, Slovakia, and Sweden. And you will also note that we remain well below the objective of $1 million a year, so 2 million by biennium, which had been set during the curation of the subcount by the General Assembly of State Parties in 2013. And for information, in Annex 2, you will find a report on the 3 sources of financing for the year 2018-2019, which covers the fund and the sub-accounts, ordinary program, and extra budgetary programs. This report has several attachments which contain information such as the budgetary allocation of consultative organizations, the distribution of budget approved of the World Heritage Fund by region, which shows that Africa is the biggest beneficiary region, or the fixed expenses. Let's move on to the second part of the document. It is a progress report on the implementation of the fund for the present biennium, that is to say 21, the certified accounts, and a few figures are given for information for the first months of 2021. Compulsory contributions, we get back to Article 16.1, that is to say the 181 member states to the convention that are paying, have to pay their contribution. Those contributions assessed are of $2,116,849, so $2 million, a bit more, paid $2,227,478. For income for 2020, we will note, first of all, the assessed contributions. Here we have the assessed contributions received according to Article 16.1, and payments in 2020 in green on the graph were higher than the amount of assessed contribution, which means that some of the arrears have been paid. Now, for received contributions on the basis of Article 16.2, that is to say the 13 state parties, we note also a relative increase after the decrease of 2017. It is important to note, and you all know that there is one state party to the convention which since 2017, if I'm not mistaken, remember that this is a voluntary contribution, so this state has not financed the Heritage Fund. With regards to additional voluntary contributions that are not earmarked, they have increased by 64% between 2019 and 2020. This is mainly due to the same state parties as 2018-2019, Australia, Norway, Netherlands, Sweden, and Turkey, which continue to double on a regular basis their compulsory contribution. We will now see the income received on the sub-account of the World Heritage in 2020. The contributions dedicated to specific activities remains very high, thanks to another major contribution of Norway of $3.4 million, aiming at Africa mainly, and to the in danger list of heritage. Without this unique contribution, we would see that the sub-account financing would have been the same as that of 2016. This sub-account has received a major contribution for the government of China in 2020 to cover the costs of the organization of the 44th Extended World Heritage Committee meeting. Annex 4. In Annex 4, you have a report on the three sources of financing for 2021, which cover the ordinary fund, the sub-funds, and the extra budgetary resources for the end of 2021. And the same attachments present information on the allocation, contracts, distribution of budget per region, and the table of staff for the center. Here, it is important to know that on the 31st of May 2021, with regards to compulsory payment, that is to say 16.1, we have 59.6% of arrears. The year is not over, so I suppose that everybody will come through. 63% remain unpaid. Part 4, as indicated in my introduction, I keep the fourth part till the end. The fourth part of the document follows the follow-up of the decision 43/14 taken in Baku in 2019. As you can see, following the adoption by the committee in 2018 of a strategy for mobilization of resources and communication, a cumulative report is presented in Annex 9 of the present document. In summary, the purpose of $750,000 for the World Heritage Fund over 3 years was reached, whereas the relative objective of the extra budgetary fund was largely exceeded. The implementation will continue in 2021 and will be the topic of the report presented to the World Heritage Committee in its 45th session. You can see, I will not go into the details, but you have all of that on the screen and in the documents which we have received. We have already mentioned several times in this presentation the subcount for the presentation of the nominations evaluation created in a committee created in Baku. In 2021, 20 countries were invited to contribute on the basis of 18 nomination files that were considered as full. 2 of them concerned transborder sites in several countries. On the basis of the cost suggested by the decision of the committee, that is to say $22,000 per file and $44,000 for mixed or transboundary files, we could assess an amount of $440,000. We have received $46,000 thanks to countries I would like to thank ahead of time: Germany, the Czech Republic, Spain, Italy, and Slovenia. It's not much, but the funds were reoriented towards conservation activities, as I have just explained. Following the adoption by the Committee of 2017 of a roadmap for the sustainability of the World Heritage Fund, a report on the short-term measures is presented at pages 16 to 20, 15 to 18 on the English version of the present document. I will not enter into the detail of each measure, but in summary, those short-term measures have had very restricted results. A third of the projects published on the internet page have received help by donors. The objective of 10 state countries doubling their contribution was only reached by half. $19,000 were paid by sites registered on the World Heritage site. The fundraising did not bring in additional funds, and different suggestions were made to increase the contributions, but those have only increased by only 20% of the expected amount. We now reach the third part of the document, which will be mobilizing the attention of the budget group during the 44th standard session, as it is the budgetary suggestion for 2022-2023, which will lead us to consider the financing of the preliminary analysis or preliminary assessment on which the ad hoc group has worked several times since January. That is to say, the decision of the budget will have an impact on the decision 11 and 12 that you have to adopt as members of the committee. Since 2004, decision 28 and 11, the methodology used to define the budgetary level of the next biennium is based on the total income of the basic account. That is to say, the voluntary contributions and compulsory contributions without any restriction, as indicated in the financial statements that have been certified. In the present situation, it means a budget for 2022-2023 based on the income of 2018-2019, so $5.9 million, as indicated by Jyoti. If we compare that to the $5.6 million of the present biennium, this represents an increase by 5%. As you can see on the graph, this increase is due to a higher level of voluntary contributions that are not earmarked for 2018-2019, as the funds should remain, the incoming fund should remain stable, as the fund is almost universally ratified. An increase of the fund can only come from voluntary contributions that are not earmarked. That is to say, paying non-earmarked contributions is contributed to the future of the convention. For the major part of the budgetary lines, there are no modifications between the suggested budget for 22-23 and the present budget. The budget for consultative activities remains the same in dollars. The only great difference between 22-23 and the present biennium is an increase on 3 lines, a bit on the retrospective inventory, 77%, on international assistance, which moves from $1.2 million to reach a level of 28-29, which is one of the requests I receive most from the member countries. The reinforcement of capacity budgetary line, which had been reduced to 0 in 2018, had never been fulfilled since. In 2019, the Heritage Committee Decision 43.12 has approved the principle, and I insist on the principle of nomination in 2 phases, with a new mechanism called the preliminary assessment as a first phase, and the present mechanism as discussed in paragraph 118 of orientations. And of operation guidelines, correction by the interpreter. In the document WHC/21/44com/80, 12 will be studied by the committee in its next session of meeting. So this phase A of preliminary assessment was assessed to a bit more than $1 million for a 2-year period. This is what you see on the screen. That is to say, phase 2 is covered for the biennium. Phase 1 is not covered yet. That is to say, we have to go and look for the money. And if we look at details, $1.18 million based on the examination of the 35 files we have every year, they are distributed as followed: $1.120 for 2 years. Consultative services, which means documentary elements, dialogue with states parties, review by the panel, reports, and $80,000 for the Secretariat, which is reviews, comments, completeness check of files. Those figures indicate the remaining figure to be paid by biennium. That is to say, what you see on the screen now is the difference, which is not covered yet by the 181 member states and the 13 other state members, by withdrawing one state party, which since 2012, as I have said earlier on, has not paid its voluntary contribution. This is what you see on the screen. If everything had been paid until now, what we could receive by biennium would be those 2 figures put together, that is to say, $242,000 more or less, which means that this could partially fund the preliminary analysis or assessment. If we take into account what was due in the past, so the arrears for 2019, and there's 181 countries, there's a slight mistake on the screen. It should be 181 and not 180. Those $491,503, those are the arrears. This money could be used for the first year of the implementation of the 2 phases. Once again, this is only a partial amount, as you'll understand, because it would only cover the first year of the biennium in 2 phases.
So it is important to understand once more that the arrears do not include the state party that has not paid its contribution since 2012. So we looked at the scenario on the basis for the discussions that will take place under item 11 and item 12 as a consequence, and the scenario with the current funding is as follows. We have calculated how much would cost the project to complete the two phases, $40,000 per file per year. Per year, first year, we would need to reduce from 35 to 29 files, second year and follows to 21 files. That is the reality today. And the decisions that will be taken under items 11 and 12 will need to be reflected unless we get some funding that we do not have today. And if the decisions are taken, unfortunately, on the basis of the present scenario, we would be incapable of implementing this with the 35 files that are currently under review. We then have scenario 2. That's a second possibility. This would be to use the sub-account for the evaluation of phase 1 nominations, which has been in existence since 2019, for the funding of the preliminary analysis and conservation activities, while ensuring that there are sufficient voluntary contributions in the sub-account. What you see here, with the present funding, we could add 2 files a year. So when we stated earlier that there were 29 files in first year, we could go up to 31 and so on, if the contributions were as they are now. Now, we had the exercise of 440 and we could go up to 5 to 6 additional files a year, but this is voluntary. So up until now, since its inception, it is in fact a little low to take the decision of 2 phase with the present funding. So there is a third possible scenario that we would not like to go back to, and that's the scenario that was used when we had the cut that was mentioned earlier of about $1 million of the budget of the World Heritage Fund, and that would be to cut budget lines. Now, it is important to remember that this would mean cutting all budget lines that we have at present, and this would have consequences for the implementation of the convention, and in particular for the protection of cultural and natural world heritage through international assistance and the reactive monitoring system. I'd remind you that when we had to cut the budget of the fund by 21% in 2012, all budget lines for capacity building, one of the strategic objectives of the committee, this is one of the 5 C's, was dropped to 0. The funds for reference manuals, which is another way to improve capacities and help the states, were also completely taken out. And for World Heritage Education, the line was divided by 2. Do we want to go back to such measures with conservation, which is the whole raison d'etre of the convention, which I reread this weekend to fully understand what is the future, the possible future that we can expect? And this is why I believe, and I'm speaking now as ADG, that budgetary decisions that will be taken at the coming committee meeting will need to be taken insofar as possible in such a way that they will determine your decisions under items 11 and 12. Of course, there will be your decisions, you're the committee. So there is a recommendation, but the recommendation does not take into account current funding levels. It is based on proposals for possible future funding that we do not have and that we do not see over the short term if we look at the past 10 years. And this is why it is important that any decision that the committee takes is based on deep reflection. I am very concerned as an ADG, I must say this, and I think that there is an opportunity. The ambassadors and delegates know me. I am impatient by nature, but in this specific case, I believe that in-depth reflection is required. The decision is up to you, but I believe that the coming 50th anniversary next year is a good opportunity not to take a speedy decision that could lead to major consequences for the future of the fund and for the future of the convention. So I hope that I have been sufficiently brief. I have not gone through all of the slides and information that you have in the document. It could have taken a couple of hours, but of course, I am available and will be available during budget meetings to support you, to help you take the best decision, which is, of course, up to you, the members of the committee. So thank you very much. We're available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ADG. Please, we are here and available for any questions or comments. Please indicate by raising your hand. I see already a hand up. Please go ahead from the distinguished Ambassador of Palestine. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Et merci aussi à Monsieur
Thank you very much. Thank you, ADG, for this presentation, which has been very clear.
And the question at the same time. In the presentation, for those who are not familiar with the budget of the World Heritage, there might be some confusion when we talk about the assessed contributions. Indeed, in the assessed contributions, there are two categories. One, it is what is called voluntary contribution, but it is assessed, which means it is obligatory, and the compulsory contribution that Mr. ADG has mentioned for 181 state parties. And the other state parties, it doesn't mean that they have no compulsory contribution. They have it, but it is called voluntary. Nevertheless, in the presentation, unfortunately, we make the distinction between these two categories as if one was really obligatory and the other is voluntary and it is optional, which is not the case. And when the figure of the arrears appeared on the screen, it did not reflect the total amounts. It has been mentioned by Mr. ADG that the voluntary contributions are not calculated in the figure that we saw, which is, I think it is not normal, because these voluntary contributions are assessed. And in that case, when we want to refer to the total amount of the arrears, it should brought both amounts together. And we didn't see actually the arrears for the 10, 12 countries that we call it voluntary contributions from the assessed contributions. This is my comment and my question. So why don't the figure of the voluntary assessed contribution does not appear in the presentation? Thank you so much.
If you allow me, dear delegate, cher Mounir, pourquoi c'est présenté comme ça?
Why is this presented in this form? As you've rightly stated, there is a distinction between the 180, I had to correct that, it was 181 because we had the former Republic of Yugoslavia, but 180. So as you rightly said, this is compulsory. And it is the famous 1%, and it is independent from the fact that some states may give a little more or may give a bit more the following year. So it is very difficult to actually calculate the exact amount. For the other member states that you have mentioned, voluntary, but as you said, in a certain way mandatory, what does not exist is a condition to pay 1%. So they cannot be considered as arrears. As you've said, it is voluntary, it is mandatory to a certain extent, but there is no 1% condition. So the arrears do not correspond. Those member states could very well pay in an entirely different figure from the 1%. And this is why it is not considered as arrears usable in the future, because we do not know whether these states should ever pay what is due, whether that would actually be 1%. And this is why the budget, if we had a 1% for those 13 member states, we would have $2.4 million, but we cannot use that figure because there is a condition that is different. As compared to the 180 states parties that are to pay 1%. And that is compulsory. But you have all of these details in the document. But you're right. We will be having new members, and it is important to explain because it isn't clear when you see 16.1, 16.2 for the first time. I mean, those of you who've been around for years, you understand how it functions. But for the new members, it is perhaps a bit difficult to understand this difference that was established at the time. What we consider today is, in terms of arrears, is the amounts that are truly due and that we will be getting at some point, not what might be due. Thank you.
I'm just looking to see if we have any other hands up. We wait for a few more minutes to see if there are further questions or comments.
Norway did a sign, but I don't know if she wants to take the floor. Yes? Please, Kirsten.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I couldn't raise my hand, so this is why I wrote in the chat directly. So thank you so much, and thank you so much for organizing this this information meeting. When it comes to the preliminary assessment, the Norwegian point of view all the time has been that yes, it will have some additional costs in the very early stage of the, so to say, journey of a nomination to the World Heritage List, but that we will have considerably reduced costs related to state of conservation reports, reactive monitoring missions, costs related to danger listing, etc., because we will have good quality nominations and therefore less problems after the inscription. So our question is, has there been any calculation or estimations done regarding possible savings that this nomination reform will have inside the World Heritage Fund? And if not, will it be possible for you to provide us with this kind of information? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Si vous me permettez, je reprends en français.
So if you'll allow me, I'd like to answer that in French. Now, it is true that this proposal to lighten over time, as you said, over time, the costs involved. And let me present this from the point of view of the Secretariat and the work that is done with the advisory bodies. We are not 100% convinced, to be perfectly honest with you. And this is for a simple reason. We can see that the follow-up after listing, in fact, increases. We have 1,100 sites listed so far, more or less. If we have about 30 additional each time, then that will increase. And you will be discussing this at the 44th session. Unfortunately, there are several sites that a few years back were not in danger or might not have been in danger, but that will now be requiring more work from the advisory bodies and the Secretariat in terms of monitoring. So unfortunately, the maths don't work out. And of course, we also have cases that are related to conflicts or environmental issues that are leading us to strengthen the surveys. And I cannot say that the idea that this will lighten our load in the future will in fact be the truth. Now, there is a reflection. It is important that the committee has this reflection to take the right decisions for item 14, budget, as well as items 11 and 12. In addition to that, and this is another aspect, and you will see it in document under 11, if I'm not mistaken, or is it 12? No, it's 11. There is a proposal regarding the possibility of both being in duplication, so to speak. And again, we are not convinced. We do not believe there will be any savings over the first 5 years. There might be after that, but it is important to know that today each member state, following the listing process, does not only fund the 44 that could be funded over the 2 phases. It depends on investments over a rather long period in terms of preparation of files, and some member states have the means to do this and others unfortunately do not. And this is why some of the budgets, particularly for the sub-account for nominations, help us to work with some member states that unfortunately do not have the funds at present to do that work upstream. So yes, this is a subject for discussion, for dialogue, and this is why, if it is possible to include these issues in a broader discussion that will take place for the 50th anniversary, then we might have an overall clearer picture of what this involves for the short term, of course, but also for the medium and long term. This is a discussion, of course, that can take place, as you stated, dear delegate. Thank you.
I wanted also to add some complementary response to what the ADG has just explained, which is from the perspective of the country where you're preparing the nomination dossiers, because part of the idea of the preliminary assessment is that what you would normally spend on the preparation of the dossier would be a saving over a period of time, because we'd be paying, if you paid for the preliminary assessment processes and were to consider these contributions, as the ADG has pointed out, that in fact it's not an additional cost to the country, but is a saving from the perspective of the state's parties, because currently, for instance, many times countries are spending huge amounts of money for the preparation of dossiers, $1 million, $2 million, depending on the countries. And this is an amount from the perspective, and this we cannot do the calculation because this is based on the countries. So it's not the Secretariat to do this calculation in terms of what the savings would be, but these savings. So what I'm saying essentially is that, the contribution to support the Secretariat's work in this regard and the cost of the preliminary assessment and additional mechanisms isn't necessarily an additional cost, is what I'm saying, is that it would be really, instead of the significant cost for the dossiers, that would be then better managed, because the success, if you're able to ensure the high quality dossiers are going up and they're already prepared. This was the argument and the discussion behind. Thank you very much.
Yes, and another comment that is important, that in the proposal that has been discussed, you have to remember that as part of this new process, even if a state party does not agree with the result of the preliminary assessment, they still can submit their file. So we cannot count on future savings without knowing what will be the result of the whole process with the 2 phases. So it's important that we understand that that's a prerogative of the member states to decide if they accept all the process or they go forward. So we cannot ensure that it will be savings.
Other questions, comments? If there's a problem with raising your hand, please don't hesitate to turn your camera on and wave your hand or write in the chat. So ADG, please.
OK. Il n'y a pas d'autres mains levées.
I don't see any more raised hands, so I guess everyone is getting ready for the budget meeting during the 44th session. If there are no more questions or remarks, then we will adjourn the meeting. But first, I would like to thank you sincerely for supporting us. I would also like to add that this is the last meeting before the committee session, so I hope the committee will have had the time to reflect and to prepare for major decisions, and the Secretariat is at your disposal, even during the period preceding the committee session. We are available to answer your questions, and what we tried to do today on point 3 isn't to alarm anyone, of course. It is important for you to know, but for the sake of transparency and dialogue that needs to be had with member states, I think it is essential to share the point of view of the Secretariat, because the Secretariat is the one who has to manage such a beautiful instrument as the World Heritage Convention and the lists that belong to this wonderful convention. So I will see you in a few days for the committee and for the budget committee, which will support you in all of your reflections and discussions and decisions. And we are at your disposal to help you make the best decisions in the best deadlines. Thank you very much. So we will close the meeting. Thank you very much.